Very good morning. A very good morning, everyone. I would like to call this meeting to order, this session. Excellency, Ms. Ahmad Hassan, Ambassador of Djibouti, Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD, Mr. Moreno, Deputy Director General of the WTO, Ms. Johanna Hill, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, their participants, once again, a very, very good morning. It is indeed a great pleasure for me to chair our discussion today in the session of the WTO Public Forum on Invisible Trade, Data and the Digital Divide. The session is organized by UNCTAD with the participation of the WTO. Today, our discussion will focus on two closely related topics that are of rising importance to developing countries: trade in services and competition policy in the digital economy. Trade in services is becoming more digital and has been more dynamic than trade in goods in the last decade. Globally, digitally deliverable services account for a major part of trade in services. While this opens immense new opportunities for developing countries, policymaking in the service sector is particularly huge challenge, as this is invisible trade. We lack data and statistics to inform our policymaking in leveraging services for our development strategies. At the same time, digital platforms have become central to today's economy, reshaping the way goods and services are produced, traded, and consumed. For developing countries, they offer major opportunities, opening access to new markets, lowering barriers for entrepreneurs, and creating jobs in areas ranging from e-commerce to digitally delivered services. Furthermore, the digital economy is dominated by a handful of global platforms, raising concerns about fairness, access, and market concentration. Smaller firms in developing countries often struggle to compete on equal terms, facing high entry costs, dependency on dominant players, and limited bargaining power. Together, today, we will discuss what needs to be done to allow better measurement of trade in services. We will also touch on what international cooperation can do to keep digital markets fair, open, and accessible to all. Our discussion will be organized in two segments. First, I will have the pleasure to facilitate a dialogue between the deputy heads of UNCTAD and WTO. Then I will turn perhaps to you to ask questions, and then to a panel of distinguished experts on today's topic. If time allows, we will have additional short questions before I conclude this very important and significant and timely session. Once again, a very good morning. Without further ado, let me turn to the first part of our program. Dear Mr. Moreno, how are you doing?
Good.
Very good. Mr. Moreno, as you all know, is a very capable and brilliant Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD. And the question I have for you, sir, is how does UNCTAD view the key trends in world trade in services and servicification in recent years and the effects of digitalization on these trends? And while you are reflecting on that question, what policies are needed in face of the opportunities and challenges presented to developing countries by these trends and by the effects of digitalization? Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Ka, my dear friend. Also, thank you, DDG Hill, for being here and to do this joint session together. That is very timely, and really I'm so excited to be sharing with you today some insights and some reflections on this topic. I think that to set the stage, I'd like to give you some few key trends in trading services. First, the rising weights of services in global trade, to have some numbers with us for the discussion. According to the joint UNCTAD WTO database, global exports of services expanded by an average of 5.3% a year between 2014 and 2024, more than twice the pace of goods exports. So as a result, services now account for 27% of world exports, up from 22% a decade ago. Second, services trade is undergoing a profound transformation. Financial, ICT, and other businesses services have grown nearly 7% a year over the past decades, outpacing traditional sectors such as transport or travel. Digitally deliverable services expanded by 6.4% annually between 2014 and 2023, still faster than overall service exports. They now represent more than half of global service exports, which shows how digital transformation is redefining how services are traded. Third, services are increasingly embedded in all forms of trade. This let's say, servicification is reshaping global value creation. In 2020, services made up 73% of intermediate inputs, 18% of the value of primary products, and 31% of manufacturing value. Competitiveness in goods is increasingly driven by competitiveness in services. But participation remains uneven. We will go to that later. Developed economies are leading in digitally deliverable, knowledge-intensive services. Many developing economies remain concentrated in traditional services. And in LDCs, share of digitally deliverable services exports declines over the past decade, which shows how this digital divide is reflecting on what we are talking about. So this raises an important policy challenge: measurement. Much of services trade and trade delivered online remains invisible in traditional statistics. Only about 15 developing countries regularly report trading services by bilateral trading partner. Without reliable data, policymaking, as you all know, is constrained. UNCTAD has been working actually with member states and other partners, including WTO, to close this gap. We established an informal working group on services, trade, and data, which has identified ways to complement traditional sources with administrative data and digitally generated big data. And actually, last week, at the China International Fair for Trading Services, and that we organized together with China, where DDG Hill also delivered a video message. We launched a primer on data for trading services and development policies, precisely to provide policymakers with roadmap to navigate concepts, data sources, and uses for policy design, highlighting actually the data set that UNCTAD and WTO have. We are also providing technical assistance, for example, working with several seats and the CARICOM, whose dependence on services trade is disproportionately high. And with African countries too, seeking to add value to the critical energy transition minerals value chains, including through services, not just on the upstream part of the value chain. Another major gap is data on cross-border e-commerce. Since 2023, we have convened the task group on measuring the value of e-commerce. The group, that is currently chaired by Thailand, is preparing international guidelines to support statistical offices, building on IMF, OECD, WTO, and UNCTAD International Handbook on precisely measuring digital trade. But improving measurement is only one part of the challenge. Countries also need to build capacity. And there we have the UNCTAD's e-trade readiness assessments to identify bottlenecks, support e-commerce strategy development, and foster reforms. And actually, more than 40 developing countries, including 27 LDCs, have already benefited, and more than 15 countries have launched already national e-commerce strategies with our support. So, in closing, services are now the backbone of trade. Data digitalization and capacity determine the capacity of countries to seize opportunities. And I think this is the objective that we must pursue from our side, from the institutions. So I will leave it there and continue the conversation later. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary General, for those very insightful perspectives. Let me now turn to my sister here, Deputy Director General, Ms. Hill. Very good morning. Madam Deputy Director General, how is the WTO enabling predictable, open conditions for digital trade in services, and what practical support does the Secretariat provide to help developing countries benefit, particularly in the field of trade in service statistics? You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Ka. Let me thank UNCTAD for organizing this interesting session and echo Deputy Secretary General Moreno's analysis. Services, especially digitally delivered services, are driving a growing share of global trade and value added, but participation remains uneven. And while developing economy services exports have grown quickly, much of the digitally delivered trade is concentrated among a smaller group. For example, China, India, Singapore, Republic of Korea, Hong Kong, China, and many others, including LDCs, remain more at the margins. So in addition to persistent data gaps for digital trade, this really means that policymakers don't have clear evidence in their hands to make the decisions that they need. And this is despite significant progress that has already been made in this field. Coming to the first part of your question, the WTO enables predictable, open conditions for digital services trade in three main ways. The first one is the existing rules, and those are very, very important. And I'm talking specifically of the GATS, the General Agreement of Trade and Services, because the disciplines of the agreement are, specific commitments that WTO members undertake to guarantee market conditions, not only for those services that are traded, but also backbone services that are really, really important for economies and development, like telecom, computing, logistics, and enhancing predictability of market conditions is really important if we want to see progress in there. And the GATS also has two specific disciplines that are very important for digital services trade. One is the Basic Telecommunications Reference Paper, because it sets the pro-competitive rules to keep telecom infrastructure affordable and efficient. And that is really foundational for digital trade. And then the new Services Domestic Regulation disciplines makes authorization procedures for service suppliers more transparent and efficient, including for those that are involved in digital trade. So even though this agreement was created 30 years ago, there's still room to do a lot in this space, especially for developing countries. Secondly, In the area of e-commerce, I think it's important to call attention that the WTO enables predictable open conditions in digital services trade through, for example, the e-commerce moratorium. This long-standing commitment not to impose customs duties on electronic transmissions has given business the certainty that they need to engage in global trade. And several members seek greater clarity on the precise scope of the moratorium. And of course, we know that views also differ on many areas, but in some of these areas. But it is important to think about how these rules have created an enabling environment for the progress that we have seen so far. And predictability, I hear this week, is an important anchor to moving forward. And I also have to mention the e-commerce work program, Ambassador. It is really an important space for developing countries to engage and learn about best practices and the creation of those enabling environment. It's a deliberative platform. Nevertheless, there are so many issues that are brought to the e-commerce work program that it is also important to think about what the priorities are for members and where we should focus. Yesterday, we launched the World Trade Report, focusing on the possible benefits that AI and trade can bring to growth and inclusive development. And one of the issues addressed there is the digital divide. So bringing information in that space is also important. I also have to mention the Plurilateral Agreement on Electronic Commerce, which aims at facilitating digital trade. As you know, that agreement has not been incorporated yet into the WTO rulebook, but it is an important one to create legally binding rules around digital trade. And then to the second part of your question on what we are doing to offer practical support to members on this area, the Secretariat is actually very engaged and involved in providing service to members in this area. I think I wanted to highlight a couple of them. First of all, in the discussions, our developing country members have frequently underlined how hard it is for them to seize opportunities around digital trade. As I mentioned in the e-commerce work program, we've talked about connectivity, digital infrastructure, and other issues around the policy and regulatory framework. And so we have been concentrating a lot in helping countries identify where gaps are, but already being filled by the work we do with other organizations, and where gaps remain that are really unfulfilled. And yesterday, as you saw, we launched 6 papers on digital trade for Africa that analyzed digital trade in their particular circumstances. I do have to mention very important inputs were received from the e-readiness UNCTAD reports. Very important work already done. The 6 pilot countries are Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, and Rwanda. You can access these online. And we're now initiating a similar exercise with Latin America and the Caribbean. Not only with the help of the World Bank, but in this occasion, also the Inter-American Development Bank has joined. So it's really great to see 2 important institutions that actually are the ones on the ground that can help deliver in terms of infrastructure, support in developing regulations, are partnering with the Secretariat. Now, let me finish by zooming in on the statistics in digital trade, which are really important. Measuring services trade is complex, and we recognize that, and the task gets harder when you come from a developing country because of the infrastructure that might not be all in place to be able to capture these statistics. So building comprehensive series takes years, but policymaking can't wait, right? So it's changing so fast. How do we capture as much information as possible? And this is where we try to bridge that gap in 2 ways: technical assistance to build national statistical capacity, and delivering ready-to-use data sets to assist policymakers. So a couple of examples. We have developed approaches on how to measure trade and services by mode of supply. This is central to the WTO's work. The trade and services by mode of supply data set that we called TISMOS provides estimates for 200 economies and 55 sectors, and it incorporates available survey data. And our estimates show that if we include services supplied through foreign branches and subsidiaries, what we call here in the House Mode 3, The share of services in global trade in 2022 raises to 42%, about 20 percentage points higher than what we traditionally talk about. Then I was also mentioned by Mr. Moreno is the interest in bilateral trade and services. And in this area, we have developed the Balanced Trade and Services BATIS dataset in partnership with the OECD. This one has become a global benchmark for bilateral trade and services statistics and remains the only source of comprehensive bilateral data in this area. And this year, we will be releasing a new data set that estimates services trade by volume, right? Removing inflation and exchange rate effects. And this is really, really important. It's not a minor thing because it helps policymakers see what is really, really happening on the ground. Let me give you an example. It showed that in 2024, digitally delivered services grew by 5.6% in terms of volume versus 9.6% in terms of value. So you can capture that there is important differences when we start to do this work. Much of this data is available through our WTO Global Services Data Hub. And importantly, it's built on the continuous methodological work in which the WTO is leading with the UN Committee on Experts on Business and Trade Statistics. And because impact depends on coordination, we co-chair the Interagency Task Force on Capacity Building on Trade Statistics, where we would welcome a strong contribution by UNCTAD. I think the voice of UNCTAD in this type of work is incredibly important. Thank you.
Thank you, DDG Hill, for very, very thoughtful and insightful perspectives. I'm sure my colleagues are all taking notes. Now let me turn again to DDG, Deputy Secretary General Moreno, for my second question. We all know that developing countries face challenges in terms of leveraging digital trade and digitally delivered services, including risks that are linked to the dominance of a few global platforms. What are the appropriate policy frameworks to address the high market concentration in digital markets? And if you can share with us the role of UNCTAD. Your thoughts.
Thank you, Chair. We are living, through a profound shift. Digitalization has transformed how data flows within and across economies. Surge in the internet use, improved cloud infrastructure, and growth of global platforms have increased interconnectedness among people, machines, and the planet. Let's think of the Internet of Things, for example. In 2022, it linked some roughly 13 billion of devices. By 2028, that number is expected to almost triple to 35 billion of devices. From sensors to smartphones, smart meters, all generating and sharing data in real time. And as we all know, growing connectivity is on top of that being turbocharged by artificial intelligence. The companies that are best positioned to capture and transform this data have seen their value soar exponentially. As of June 2025, the 6 largest firms in the world are all tech companies. Microsoft, NVIDIA, Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Meta. Together, they are worth some $16.7 trillion, nearly 6 times the GDP of Africa. Their dominance stretches across social media, e-commerce, cloud services, search, and artificial intelligence. So for developing countries, this presents both an opportunity and a challenge. On one hand, digital trade and digitally delivered services can drive growth, diversify economies, and open new pathways into global value chains. But on the other hand, rapid rise of a few global platforms raises concerns about market concentration, barriers to entry, and unequal access to the benefits of globalization that we have already seen in other parts of our globalization in terms of development gains and losses. So what can be done? Well, here, policy frameworks, and I echo what DDG Hill said just before, policy frameworks are key. We need for rules that ensure open, fair, and competitive digital markets. That means adapting competition law to digital ecosystems, tackling issues like self-preferencing and exclusionary practices. But it also means that we have to strike the right balance, which is encouraging innovation while ensuring accountability. For small businesses and startups, especially in developing countries, here, clear, predictable rules on data governance, interoperability, and platform responsibilities can make a real difference. They lower barriers, give local entrepreneurs a fair chance to compete, and help countries capture more value from the digital economy. But no country can do this alone, like in many other areas. Platforms are global, so cooperation across borders is essential. Regional cooperation, cross-border information sharing, and participation in multilateral discussions can help ensure that developing countries' perspectives and needs are reflected in emerging norms. And here is where I think UNCTAD work is relevant, is important, and have yielded some results already. For example, through our intergovernmental group of experts on competition law and policy, we provide a forum for dialogue and consensus building on digital markets. Our research and policy advice offer also concrete options for developing countries. And the technical assistance we provide helps build the institutions and capacity that countries need to regulate it effectively. In short, by working together at national, regional, and global levels, we have to ensure that the digital economy is marked by inclusion rather than divides, and we don't fall into the mistakes of the past in other areas, and try to keep the developing economies at the same path so that they can harness all the benefits that these services can bring to their economies. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, DSG Moreno. Now let me turn again to DDG Hill for your second question. The multilateral framework under the GATS aims for the progressive liberalization of trade in services. How can this objective be reconciled with the need to address market concentration and anti-competitive practices? And the second thought that I want from you is, how does the Secretariat assist developing countries to harness the potential that services trade holds?
Thank you, Ambassador. You are right in the sense that the GATS aims at the progressive liberalization of services markets, but the GATS is more than just a market access treaty. And I think it's really important to keep it in mind, because built into the GATS provisions, there are dispositions that help address anti-competitive practices and market concentration, especially when combined with sector-specific instruments, such as the reference paper on basic telecommunications. GATS could be considered a meaningful framework that is useful in disciplining monopolistic behavior, fostering transparency, and promoting pro-competitive regulation. And Article 9, for example, acknowledges that restrictive business practices by service suppliers can undermine liberalization. It gives members a framework for consultations to deal with such risks. And so the GATS really is designed not only to open markets, but also to guard against the abuse of dominance or collusive behavior, for example. And in the case of the reference paper on basic telecommunications, that one goes a bit further. Members agreed in this one to pro-competitive disciplines that remain highly relevant today, such as preventing cross-subsidization or discriminatory behavior by dominant suppliers, and requirements to ensure interconnection on a fair and transparent manner. So these rules have been critical for opening telecom markets to new players. So as you can see, Ambassador, the GATS has been very forward-looking in this sense. Now, coming on to the second part of your question, we have been at the Secretariat undertaking a lot of work under the leadership of Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala to bring in development focus to services trade. We started out a couple of years ago with a reference paper that we developed with the World Bank on the opportunities and challenges for developing countries in services trade. Last year, at the public forum, we launched a work program with 5 principal areas to work on. One, we are touching upon today, the importance of statistics. Another one, mapping regulations. And 3 more that I wanted to touch upon, because those 3 areas we are going to be delivering the first results of our work with the World Bank and other international organizations at a global conference that'll happen here at the WTO at the beginning of December, a global conference on trade and services for development. And here we will want to engage with both developed and developing countries to explore some of these tools that we will be presenting for your consideration. One has to do with a competitive dashboard that countries can take home to help them analyze services trade to see how they're doing in the different sectors, who they might be competing with, and where they think, help them think of where they want to prioritize their work in competitiveness in services trade. The other one is a handbook on services domestic regulation. Yes, it is to help implement for those that acquired did the disciplines on the JSI and services domestic regulation, but it's really open to any developing country that wants to improve its competitiveness by harnessing best practices in this area. And finally, it's a study on some developing countries that have done a lot of work on promoting services trade exports. I think this is an exciting part. What are the best practices on how promotion agencies are dealing with services trade? What are the strategies that they're implementing, and how we can bring some best practices to this house? Because the rules are not just rules to be there and be admired. They're to be used for the benefit of businesses and people. And if they're not bringing in that investment that we need, those jobs that we need, that foreign exchange that we need, then they're just sitting there, right? So I think these tools are really practical to bring in the benefits of agreements like the GATS to the real life and development strategies.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And before we transition to the second segment, I wanted to turn to you for 2 or 3 burning questions for this panel before we transition. If you can raise your flag if you have a flag. And any questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, I have a question for Pedro. Actually, you already expressed about the developing country. Okay. Yeah, thank you. I have a question for Pedro. You already explained about the developing countries, and it's amazing. Like, you have done a great job. My question is, like, I was belong from underdeveloping countries. So, is there any policies for underdeveloping countries where the resources for the digital goods are available? The resources are there, but it was not considered by the WTO or other countries. For example, if I take one of my countries' name, which is Pakistan, we are providing the goods and raw materials to Europe and other countries, but at the same time, the digital sources are there, but we are not considered as comparing for the developing countries. So, there are any policies, if you want to highlight, it will be help me to understand like how we can improve as a country, even for me, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and other underdeveloping countries who are just want to be a part of this digital trade globalization. So anything you want to discuss, it will be help me. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more at that end.
Thank you, Chair. Pascal Canet from the European Services Forum. I just wanted to see some practicalities here. You mentioned, DG Hill, that you will have an international or global conference on services for development by the end of this year. Can you elaborate a bit of that? And will that be only for the WTO members, or will it be also open for private sector? Thank you.
I don't any more questions on the floor, so we'll yield to my colleagues here, to DG Health.
Thank you. Yes, it's a global conference open to the public, and we would appreciate the participation from the private sector and other entities, especially in sharing information and best practices of what you're doing in these areas. So it's not just a theoretical discussion, but an actual learning experience for everyone on how we can harness services trade for development with the existing framework that we already have, and putting more emphasis on programs that will help countries reap the benefits of what we already have. So thank you for the question. We hope that you can come, some of the European companies can come, worldwide companies can come and share their experiences, because I think hearing from the different actors on the ground, we also would like the private sector from developing countries to come and tell us about their challenges and how the work with other international organizations can be better tailored to support their integration into the world economy through services.
Thank you. The question from Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, we provide, the most comprehensive analysis and policy building exercise that we do is the readiness assessments in countries. That goes through the official channels, through the government and the relevant counterpart, and there we provide a whole set of policy measures and recommendations and analysis and data that then lead to an e-commerce strategy in the country and to have a digital strategy nationwide. But that is done, through our official channels, and of course we'd be happy to consider that when the case comes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, DSG Moreno and DDG Hill. Join me in thanking them for this very insightful and thoughtful perspectives that they've shared with us this morning. We sincerely thank you, and we can appreciate them.
Thank you.
I will let them leave the podium now while our panelists come to sit for the second segment of our session. Thank you. Welcome again to the second segment of our session today. Let me first introduce our first panelist, Her Excellency, my sister, Ms. Kadra Ahmad Hassan, the Ambassador of Djibouti. Her Excellency Kadra Ahmad Hassan has been the extraordinary and plenipotentiary ambassador of the Republic of Djibouti to the Swiss Confederation and to the UN organizations and WTO and all international organizations since September 2016. Among her many other responsibilities, Her Excellency Kadra Ahmad Hassan is currently our chair of the Special Committee on Trade and Development, CTDSS, at the WTO since November 2019. She also coordinated the LDC group here at the WTO. Your Excellency, it is a real pleasure and honor to have you with us today. Can you give us a very brief overview of how you see the growing importance of services and the digital economies to developing countries. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, dear moderator, dear brother Professor Ka, Ambassador. Good morning to all, excellencies and distinguished participants and delegates. I want to start by thanking the organizers, UNCTAD and WTO, for this timely meeting and session. It's really a pleasure for me to join this panel and to speak about Djibouti perspectives on digital trade, but specifically on the invisible trade regarding data services and digital divide. As you all know, Africa is undergoing a phase of digital transformation that has the potential to revolutionize trade and economic inclusion through the AFCFTA and its new protocol. What I can say is that since COVID-19, the crucial role of digitalization has been established in the economy, and its great potential for trade was demonstrated. Furthermore, digital technologies optimize supply chains and business operations, reducing costs and transaction times, making commerce faster and more efficient. As you all know, the issue of digital trade and more specifically e-commerce was one of the most discussed topics during MC13. The main outcome was the temporary extension of the moratorium on tariffs for electronic transmission, which was considered very important and almost a victory for mainly from the perspective of developing countries for big tech and maybe developed countries. However, the work program on e-commerce also has been reinvigorated since then. And the text negotiated under the joint statement initiative here in WTO have been also part of what some consider as positive steps for digital trade. The measures intended, however, to assist developing countries have been criticized for being framed in terms of best effort or best endeavor, without concrete and binding commitments regarding technical assistance and capacity building. This area, the two areas that I have mentioned in terms of multilateral negotiations on e-commerce highlight several critical issues. And as you all know, I sense that this area will be probably a focus area for the upcoming MC14. And I want to stop there.
Thank you, Ambassador, for those insightful perspectives as well. Let me now turn to Mr. Carlos Jacques Vieira Gomez of CAD, the Brazil Competition Authority. Mr. Carlos is a commissioner at the Tribunal of CADE since February 2024. He holds a degree in law from the University of Sao Paulo and a master's degree in law from the University of Brasilia. He's also an expert in regulatory law and telecommunications from the University of Brasilia. He's also a professor of company law, post-graduation courses. He worked as a consultant for the Brazilian Senate in the fields of economic, regulatory, and company law, as an advisor to the Minister Nancy Andrighi at the Brazilian Superior Court of Justice, and as a secretary for the Tribunal of CADE. Mr. Gomez is also a published author on constitutional law and antitrust law. Mr. Gomez, welcome. Can you give us a very succinct view of your perspective on competition policymaking for digital platforms? Thank you.
Thank you so much to be part of this discussion in the name of the Ambassador Ka. And regarding the question, The Brazilian Ministry of Finance held a public consultation last year to gather input from civil society and members of the government about a potential new law focused on competition in digital platforms. CADE actively participate in the process, and the DMA and the DSA Acts have clearly been an inspiration to ignite the discussions, but federal government has already stated it does not intend to fully copy a foreign law, but adapt it to Brazilian reality. We are expecting the new proposed bill sent by the government to the Congress, and this week, it's a historical week for Brazil because the Congress just this week the government sent to the Congress a new bill. And there was being discussions regarding the creation of a special investigation unit for digital markets inside CADE.
Thank you so much. Now I turn to our third panelist, my colleague, Professor Mira Buri. Professor Buri, you're a professor of international economics and international law at the Faculty of Law of the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. She teaches international intellectual property, media, internet, and trade law. Your current research interests are in the areas of digital trade, data protection, and data governance. And you've published widely in leading journals in these topics. And some of you edited and authored publications include Trade Governance in the Digital Age, Legal Design, Public Service Broadcasting 3.0, Legal Design for the Digital Present, Big Data and Global Trade Law, Intellectual Property in an Integrated Economy, etc. You consult with the European Parliament, the WTO, UNESCO, ASEAN, and WEFT. You come to us here in this panel with a very wide and deep intellectual leverage and thoughts. Can you tell us, in 1 minute, if you can, which I know you can, what competition law needs to achieve the digital economy work for development, drawing from this wide and broad experience? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind words, Ambassador Carr. I'm really humbled now, but I will use this minute to convey maybe just a couple of key messages coming myself from the Digital Trade Law Corner. As you know, my team and I have a data set that we have developed that covers all trade agreements since the year 2000 that deal with digital trade in some way, and we call them across 130 different items. So for all of you, this is an open access source that you can use. So my key message really is that developing countries, in order to benefit and progress in the digital economy, is to become more proactive in digital trade rulemaking. So we have seen now over the years that there is a sort of a lacking behind of least developed and developing countries in proactively cooperating in the digital trade. That will be really my key message. And here it's not only the multilateral framework, of course, that is meant, but also through the channel of free trade agreements engaging in WTO plus. So commitments going beyond what we have in the WTO and WTO extra issues, so completely new issues such as those in the area of competition law, but also in the area, for instance, of AI cooperation. And as DDG Moreno was mentioning also, this needs to be coordinated with domestic frameworks, including with regard to platform regulation. And I'm going to stop here.
Thank you, Professor. Let me turn back to Her Excellency Khadra Ahmad Hassan. what is the relevance of services and trade in services for the development strategies of Djibouti, your country, which is an important transport hub in that region? And based on your country's experience, what are the opportunities and challenges of digitalization for your services-related strategies?
Thank you, dear brother. For those of you who know the location of Djibouti, services and trade are central to Djibouti development strategy and also economy. Our strategic position as a transport and logistics hub in the region, it's quite well known for that. The country ports and transport services already serve as crucial gateways for regional trade. We place a great importance as a country to this above-mentioned area. In fact, since 2021, we established a new Ministry of Digital Economy and Innovation with the aim of transforming administration and the economy and making digital technology a driver of growth. And investment have been made in developing the digital infrastructure, including by having the Djibouti Data Center, which serves as a hub for regional connectivity and data hosting. This infrastructure supports the growth of digital services and e-commerce by providing local and international businesses with access to state-of-the-art hosting and cloud computing services. It's clear that our ambition is to be a transport and logistics hub through the development of infrastructure and establishment of free trade zones area. And we actually have one of the biggest that has been inaugurated in 2018. And of course, modernization and digitalization is the path for that. The digitalization of the services, it's also seen as a trade facilitation tool by increasing operational efficiency, reducing cargo handling times, and facilitate integration with regional and global trade platforms. The adoption of digital systems in ports, logistics, e-commerce enables Djibouti to strengthen its competitiveness, which is key in our region, improve operational transparency, and offer innovative services to both local and international businesses. For this reason, we have taken and continue to take significant step in digital transformation. We had already a national strategy to make the digital technology central to economic, administrative, and social development by 2035. And Djibouti's role as a commercial and technological hub in the region, we think, will be strengthened by that. I think also what I want to mention here is that Djibouti hosts the most advanced telecommunication hubs in Africa, thanks to 14 submarine cables, which makes it a crucial nodal for global communication connecting Africa, Europe, and Asia. So we try to also leverage that aspect of the connectivity. What I want to maybe also signal is that in June 23rd, which is like maybe 3 months ago, the National Assembly approved the digital code after that strategy, which is a comprehensive regulatory framework that integrates laws on telecommunications, e-commerce, electronic signature, and cybersecurity. The adoption of the digital code by Djibouti positions the country among the most advanced African nation in terms of digital regulation, which was a big gap for us. This regulatory framework covers key areas such as data protection, cybersecurity, e-commerce, with the aim of accelerating the country's digital transformation But having said that, and maybe in the Q&A, I can give some example of the initiative we are part of, but I want to turn to the challenges. And the challenges remain despite all this investment from the government in terms of accessibility, affordability, and reliability of digital services, especially in rural areas. Even in urban areas, I think the affordability it's still an issue. And I want to say that also one of the key challenge is the reliable statistics that are lacking to measure cross-border data flows, online service exports, or the impact of digital platforms on local economies. Without this information, the ability to develop policies for inclusive digital trade is severely limited, including its social dimension. Maybe we can also discuss I don't know, I'm looking at the time, but we can discuss the statistical challenges, which is something that are that exists definitely in Djibouti, but also I would say it's a challenge that is shared by developing LDCs, but also developed countries, because I think it's an as it has been underlined. I mean, underlined by ITU. There are no available statistics on the value of digitally ordered trade in the case of LDC. And digital trade is happening, even though it's happening in the LDCs, the digital trade. We need to have improved tools to track it and not only for LDCs. That's why I was saying that it's also in some developing and also maybe developed countries. And in that weakness, it's key to address that weakness, because it's not about number, it's about also having evidence-based tool for policymakers, and also in terms of the negotiations, even here. I think if we don't have the data, that weakness, it's and I want to take data as a power. Let me put it that way. But I will conclude on the opportunities and the solutions through international cooperation. And I think I have heard Mr. Moreno talking about the e-trade assessment for UNCTAD. As Djibouti, we have been one of the countries as LDC that requested that assessment. Unfortunately, it was not possible because of lack of funding. And we had to, a few years down the road, to turn to the World Bank. And we were able to secure the Djibouti digital economic diagnostic through the World Bank in 2024. So here maybe it's a call also for strengthening, and as a recommendation, strengthening the funding to organizations such as UNCTAD that are willing to help. But unfortunately, because that tool was so popular and so many requests, they were not able to take up our request as an LDC, because other developing countries who are even middle income were also willing to have the e-trade assessment. So I want to stop there. I will be happy to maybe exchange on some recommendation later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for that valuable insights that is practical and give us the context of a country. Now, I go back to Mr. Carlos Gomez. Mr. Gomez, what are the regulatory and policy frameworks and instruments for ensuring fair competition in digital trade in Brazil?
Great. The main tool to ensure fair competition in all markets, not only digital ones, is the Competition Act of 2011. CADE acts both in the ex-ante merger control and investigating anti-competitive conducts. There is also the important use of advocacy in promoting pro-competitive legislation and regulation. About the digital markets, as the largest jurisdiction in Latin America, CADE takes part in many transnational mergers, including those related to digital markets and services. Online retail has been a key sector target by CADE, considering the presence of larger Brazilian players. From 5 to 10 digital big tech companies will be into the new investigation office, and the criteria will be the concept of the platforms of significant relevance and annual turnover of about 10 billion of US dollars worldwide, and at the same time, 1 billion of US dollars of annual turnover in domestic in Brazil, inside Brazil. Focused in a fast investigation procedure on unilateral conducts like self-preferencing, killing acquisitions, and exclusivity agreements. Also, qualitative criteria to identify the digital companies that will be open the new Digital Investigative Office of CADE will be addressed, as well as access and capacity of data processing, a strategic position for development of other business, and digital integration with adjoining markets. And the CADE is committed, the authority commitment to promote a more balanced playing field in digital markets and services place CADE in the forefront of the most pressing discussion. At the same time, it strives to secure legal certainty for the players involved. And we have, I bring here 4 cases that we are discussing. The Google News, CADE is investigating whether Google improperly used third-party journalist content on the Google search and the Google News platforms. This conduct could ultimately affect the organic traffic of news outlets and undermine the sustainability of the news sector. During the investigation, Commissioner Thompson has recently invited civil society, including associations, professional organizations, and academics, to submit technical contributions that may assist in the outcome of the case. The second case, the Apple App Store, CADE investigated whether the fees charged by Apple to developers in its Apple Store were anti-competitive or not. During the course of the investigation, the General Superintendent imposed an interim measure in order for Apple to adapt its store. The measure was further confirmed by the tribunal, mandating Apple to review its fee structure. Apple is currently negotiating a consent decree with CADE, and the interim measure is suspended while the negotiations are taking place. The third case, the Meta AI, CADE dismissed a complaint about Meta AI's feature on WhatsApp. The General Superintendent ruled that at the time there was not enough evidence to continue the investigations. The case can also be reopened if new evidence comes into light. And the last one case, the Apple NFC. CADE is currently investigating Apple for anti-competitive conduct by blocking access to NFC technology in the iPhone for competing wallets. So that is my contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez, for those, particularly the cited examples. Now I turn back to Professor Buri. As a scholar who has studied and written extensively on trade law and governance, competition law, and digital economy, how can we facilitate digital trade for developing countries through appropriate regulatory and policy frameworks in both areas, digital trade and the interface with competition law? And you've had the example cited by Ambassador Kadra in that context. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. I would like to zoom out a little bit from the very invaluable, of course, country specific experiences and basically think a little bit about having 2 types of inequality. So on the one hand, we have the inequalities of digital trade, which were mentioned already in the first part of this panel, where we talk about, lacking infrastructure, e-payments, digital skills that are not in place, as well as data access, which is particularly important for homegrown innovation and now also the AI development and deployment. On the other hand, and this is the part that is more interesting for me, is this inequalities in digital trade rulemaking that we have in terms of developing country and least developed countries' participation. And looking at our data, we see that we have 0 preferential trade agreements with digital trade chapters between least developed countries, and we only have 4 such agreements between developing and least developed countries. So it is evident that there needs to be some sort of an advancement of the regulatory framework to accommodate also developing countries. But this can be quite hard, and I was thinking a little bit about it, that it's almost like for those countries to play chess, however, at multiple boards, because on the one hand, there is the external, sort of the trade dimension, where very often these developing countries may commit to certain obligations that are oftentimes facing or pushed by stronger trade partners. And at the same time, these developing countries must ensure that their domestic framework in the area of data governance is in place. And this is quite a diverse sort of a framework as well, because it covers, as it was mentioned, so platform regulation, competition law, privacy protection, but also things on cybersecurity. And very often this sort of a domestic and internal dimensions, they are unfolding at very different speeds. There is very rare is that there is a coordination and coherence amongst the development of these different frameworks, and they are, of course, dependent on the country-specific skills, the regulatory capacity, and the also financial resources at the country. My point that the message that I want to bring forward is that in making this digital trade framework, what developing countries should do is really tailor this framework to their own sort of priorities and interests. And here what is happening, and we see this happening, that increasingly there is no copy pasting of existing templates of bigger trade agreements that we have, but actually developing countries are copy and adapting these frameworks to their preferences. And we see this very clearly with the example of the African Union and the African Continental Free Trade Area Digital Trade Protocol, which is a unique type of treaty that was tailored to the preferences of African countries, which also cover a great number of developing and least developed countries. So I think this is an important type of mechanism, and developing countries should definitely use it, including a great number of safeguard mechanisms to accommodate their different levels of development. And again, here we have a great number of examples with transition clauses, with review clauses, with capacity building, technology transfer, and transition periods. So law is malleable. It's something that can be really tailored to the preferences of developing countries, and I would definitely support this.
Thank you, Professor. Now I move to our second round of questions. And if you can all be a bit briefer, because we are encroaching into time boundaries, let me turn back to you, my sister Ambassador Hassan. Excellency, what do you think should be the aspirations in the upcoming WTO negotiations in the areas of digital trade and in services for least developing countries such as Djibouti, and I would push you for my country as well, the Gambia?
Thank you, dear moderator. I will reply to this question. I will be happy. I wouldn't dare to talk about specific perspective of the Gambia. I wouldn't do that. But as an LDC, I think I can say, I will start by saying that I want to recall paragraph 8 of the MC12 outcome document, which call for the Council for Trade and Services to review and promote the operationalization of the LDC services waiver, including to explore improvements in LDC services export data, to review information on LDC services supplier and consumers of LDC services in preference providing member markets. This is a concrete mandate And I want to maybe start by recalling the importance of implementing and fulfilling the ministerial mandates. Some work is underway with the LDC leading on how best to uphold LDC services waiver promises for businesses in LDCs. So I think maybe it's a good place to start if we want to look ahead to MC14. I think there is a clear need for the next ministerial for more concrete and impactful agreements and decisions that can truly support LDC's participation in the digital economy. We should demand as LDCs and negotiate binding technical assistance, real capacity building and technology transfer to develop digital infrastructure and skills that should promote technology exchanges and know-how transfer with developed countries and developing countries also. I think the focus should not only be as, and I alluded to it in my first 1 minute kind of perspective also, we should not, it should not always competition between the moratorium, the e-commerce moratorium and the work program. I think we need to be a little bit more creative and revisit those dichotomies because we know the limits of both now for MC14. So I think it's important to think about how, and I'm speaking as an LDC, we should not be limited to a kind of passive integration into global digital markets, but we should aim to defend digital sovereignty and promote digital industrialization so that we are not back in the old schemes of playing catching up. Because that's where we are heading. And that's why I was also mentioning, I remember I have been asked several times why LDC are not part of the GHI initiative. And I kept saying it's very difficult to join an initiative that is already putting into place rules when at the national level, the regulatory frameworks are not in place. And I think that's still the case for many LDCs. And from what I see also, the developing countries that joined that initiative are not, several of them, or many of them, I would say, are not part of it anymore. So I think we have to recognize the limits of what exists, what is on the table and in the market, and be creative and be a little bit more inclusive in terms of the solution that are proposed for MC14. Let me start.
Thank you, Ambassador. Mr. Gomez, looking forward, how can competition authorities contribute to ensuring fairer competition in digital markets, particularly in ways that reflect the needs and aspirations of developing countries? And if you can be brief, please.
As I'll be very briefly, building institutional capacity, and competition authorities can invest in training, technical expertise, and digital tools to monitor market conduct, algorithmic practice, and data-driven business models more effectively. Second, cooperation with international peers, as many digital platforms operate globally. Cross-border cooperation and knowledge sharing with authorities in other jurisdictions can help developing countries overcome asymmetries in resource and expertise. Third, promotion of interoperability and data portability, encouraging or mandating standards that allow users to move between platforms more easily can reduce lock-in and foster local innovation. And last, supporting local digital ecosystems. Authorities can design remedies that do not just discipline dominant players, but also enable the growth of smaller local firms and startups, ensuring that the digital economy reflects local needs and cultures.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez. Now I turn back to Professor Buri. Professor, how do you see the challenges related to the regulation of the digital economy evolving in the near future? And connected to that is, how can we make this a fairer and more equitable outcome so that all can benefit from this very fast and important digital revolution?
Thanks so much for the question. So I do see a number of challenges that can be linked on the one hand to the fluidity of the technological advancement, but also geopolitical shifts. So these are related, of course, to the unilateral measures that we are observing, and also this underlying national security concerns that we also see. So overall, this all can lead to a even more fragmented regulatory framework for the data-based economy, which is linked to higher costs, both for businesses, for countries, and overall lessened economic benefits, as it was mentioned a few times already. And I go back to sort of my firstly suggested response to such challenges, and that would be actually more cooperation that can also translate into more proactive digital trade rulemaking by developing and least developed countries. And I think that this coherence, sort of this coordination with the domestic frameworks that Ambassador Hassan was mentioning, is a challenge and remains quite important. But I would not completely agree that this should be a hindrance to actually engage in cooperation. They should, of course, happen in parallel, but not cooperating is also not necessarily the answer. And I do see here clearly, I want to mention this beforehand as well, that the WTO agreement on e-commerce can be the baseline, can be a very important foundation that can also bring together countries perhaps that do not have so much experience in digital trade rulemaking so far, because it is not a very far-reaching agreement. So this can provide an important basis, and as the OECD has recently shown, just having this sort of a multilateral framework, which can potentially include all the WTO members, will have really a sizable economic benefit for all, although the agreement is not very far-reaching. I'm going to stop here.
Thank you so much, Professor. We're coming to the end of this session. We're a little bit above time, but I would allow a few questions because there's a lot that have been shared by this esteemed panelist. If you have a question, please, you can take the floor. Any questions? Yes, please proceed.
Yes, thank you so much for all the panelists and ambassadors for this discussion. I have a question, like a couple of questions. The first is for Ambassador Kadra. You mentioned that one key area of potential outcome that LDCs would look for on e-commerce would be some binding commitment for capacity building. So I was wondering, what's the forum where and the sort of outcome and forum where this is discussed? Is it the WTO work program? Is it the WTO agreement, or is it another committee within the WTO? Because this is interesting. The WTO work program is supposed to be a deliberative. So how do you envisage this to happen and have a commitment? My second question is, I know that Djibouti didn't join the WTO agreement on e-commerce, the JSI or the plurilateral, but Gambia, for example, I know Ambassador is part of it. So my question also is, Article 20 on development, it's true that it's very best endeavor language. And as Professor Mira mentioned, it's also, given that there's not a lot of market access element in it, it makes it like a low ambition but good agreement to start with. So is there any prospect for a phase 3 negotiation under this initiative that focuses on development and tries to revamp Article 20 and make this more attractive and more development oriented? And a third question is, now we have the digital trade protocol that has been agreed, not yet entered into force, of course, and will be subject to ratifications. But at least we know that Africa now and African LDCs have 32 African LDCs have their digital rulebook, and this is a great advancement. So how do you envisage, Ambassador, engaging in, I mean, this provides a rulebook for LDCs to start engaging in rulemaking and in concluding bilateral agreements with their trade partners on digital trade. What are your priorities on digital trade if you start negotiating bilaterally for e-commerce or digital trade agreements? What's the priorities that you'd like to see there? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. One more, if is in the room. Yes, the last one, and then we will get the panel and we'll conclude. Please take the floor.
Congratulations for this discussion. It's very interesting. I have one question to Mr. Carlos Gomes. The new bill seeks to align Brazil with international trends in digital platform regulation, notable the European experience under the Digital Markets Act. However, there are emerging reports and academic studies suggesting that in Europe, the DMA has in some cases led to reduced incentives for radical innovation, delayed feature rollouts, and increased regulatory cost burdens. How do you assess the risk that Brazil adopting a similar ex-ante regulator model might discourage investment in innovation and exacerbate the digital divide, especially in developing markets with Brazil?
Thank you. The panel? Ambassador, we start with you.
Thank you, Professor. I just want to maybe to start and clarify something about the existing joint initiative on e-commerce. When I indicated that as LDC, when as a delegation I was being approached to join, one of the I would say the reluctance was coming from the fact that, as I indicated at the national level, we were in the process of elaborating the regulatory framework. And I think the process was meant, it was not deliberation, it was negotiations. That's why for me, and I think Professor Puri was indicating that cooperation can still happen. Yes, I agree with that. Cooperation can happen, and exchanges of good practices and learning. It's something that we pursued precisely, and that's why we are part of many initiatives at the African Union level, the Smart Africa initiative. We are part of the member of the organization of digital cooperation based in Saudi Arabia, which is a cross-regional also. And the cooperation side, it's something that we really are keen on. But for me, where we were a little bit reluctant, it's to join a process where the whole purpose was to negotiate and the rules. And I think it was difficult for us because of the data weakness part I was in terms of I was referring to earlier. It was very difficult to have a negotiation that is evidence-based and that will not jeopardize what we're trying and what we are prioritizing at the national level. Because as I said, it's not only about consuming digital goods. It's also about having a certain governance and sovereignty on the digital economy that we want to be part of. So that's, I think, was the key reluctance. And I think it's the case for many LDCs and African delegations that were not part of that that initiative because was something that I was hearing. In terms of what I said about negotiating for MC14, because I foresee, and I think that was the question about how to go about it, will take definitely engagement and leading from the LDC side to come up with concrete proposal, and it goes through internal processes to come up with that, because it has to be something that all LDC not only embrace but also can have input from their national perspective as a group. So I think it will take us a little bit of internal discussions and elaboration and formulation. But what I foresee, I wanted to put that in parallel with what I foresee that it's coming. It's again the e-commerce moratorium and the worker program, which is, as you indicated, deliberative. And I think LDC is very active in that, putting into discussion the development dimension, and also how we would like to see the digital divide gap closed. But we are not yet, and I don't necessarily see an outcome on more binding kind of technical assistance for MC14. I think we have been here around in the WTO enough for the negotiation to see that it's not something that is realistic. But this should be the aim for us if we really want to close the digital gap, including from the rules perspective. Let me put it that way.
Thank you, Ambassador. 30 seconds.
Oh, so your worries are very welcome. We don't want to start with a new regulation for the sector, neither to just copy and paste the MA and DSA acts in Brazil. The bill is just for create a new sector investigation office inside CADE regarding digital companies. Up to 5 to 10 digital big tech companies will be watched by CADE, and just in anti-competitive conducts, not in regulatory ones. We are aware that innovation can bring us more and more than regulation.
Thank you. Professor, 30 seconds.
I just want to say thank you for the conversation and for your excellent moderation. Thanks so much.
That's 10 seconds. Thank you so much. Colleagues, we come to the end of this very, very insightful and thoughtful session. It's not the end of the conversation. I would do a quick chair summary before we leave the room. As I see it, and as I've heard it, and as you've heard it, our panel has highlighted clearly that invisible trade, anchored in data flows, digital services, and knowledge exchange, is now a vital driver of global commerce. We also had now how data has become a new factor of production, shaping competitiveness, innovation, and resilience. And data is more than the new oil, as you often had. It's more than that. Our panel also showed that data and invisible trade are reshaping commerce and development. But the digital divide remains a pressing challenge that must be a priority for our countries and for the support that is needed for all of us to collectively harness and create value from digital trade. The digital divide remains stark. While some economies are unlocking value through data-driven trade, many of our countries in the developing world continue to be risked being left behind due to the clearly glaring infrastructure gaps, limited digital skills, and unequal access to platforms and markets, and not deep interventions that can meaningfully and sustainably resolve what is required for us to harness digital trade. I've also appreciated that our speakers, all of them, from the DDG and the DSG and these esteemed panels underscored three key insights from where I sit here. First, trust and governance of data are essential for ensuring security, privacy, and fairness in cross-border flows. In many ways, it has been reflected in their intervention. And second, investment in digital infrastructure and skills is crucial for inclusive participation in the global digital economy. And third, international cooperation, and I think it has been underscored by all panelists, through trade rules, and you've wonderfully shared with us some of the regulatory perspective, in addition to the scholar here, our professor, that through trade rules, standards, and capacity building remains core and central to bridging digital divides and ensuring that invisible trade benefits all and not leaving few behind. The clear takeaway as we leave this room for me is that data and digital trade are not just technical issues. That needs to be clear in our minds, but deeply developmental. Deeply developmental. So it is everybody's business. The digital divide is not inevitable. It can be narrowed from my lenses with the right mix of policy, partnerships, and innovation. Another key takeaway that I gathered from both panels, we must invest in data and digital infrastructure, and in skills, and in trust, while strengthening cooperation to ensure meaningful inclusivity. As we look forward, this discussion here in this session points to all of us a future where digital trade can become a true equalizer, but only if we strengthen multilateral cooperation. So we all in this house must not sit aside to see multilateral trade being wedged and destroyed. It is to our collective interest to renew our commitment on multilateral cooperation and multilateral trade, invest in our people, and embed meaningful inclusivity and trust as at the core of this digital economy. Moving forward, invisible trade should be a visible driver of shared prosperity for all. Let us take these insights forward with a shared commitment to ensure that invisible trade becomes what? Visible. You heard me. Invisible trade becomes visible force for inclusive growth and opportunity global, worldwide. I wish you a wonderful rest of the day and enjoy your lunch, and thank you, panelists.
Thank you.